Hi guys, so today I'm going to be demoing and reviewing the 27 palette from Melt Cosmetics. Looks a little bit like this. This palette is so beautiful, spoiler alert. I feel like this one is even more wearable definitely than the Gemini palette, but I will include the full video of how I got this eye look coming up, so stay tuned for that. Last month, as we are all aware, I'm sure, Melt released their coveted Gemini palette. Looks a little bit like this. This one is beautiful. It was limited edition and they said they are not restocking it, so that kind of sucks. But this new limited edition palette, the 27, I think is going to be the same deal. And I think when Melt says limited edition, they mean limited edition. So if you do want it, I would definitely grab it when it goes up for sale. And it sells out really fast, so I would mark your calendars if you are looking to get it. The official launch date is coming up. I'm not sure if they've released that yet, but I will put it in the description for what day it is coming out. I got it on the early release, so you still have a chance to get this if you do want it. So I think the Gemini palette and the 27 palette both were created by each of the two founders of Melt Cosmetics. One created this one for her birthday, she's a Gemini, and then the other founder, she named it 27 because her birthday was on June 27th. And I'm not sure if they're going to come out with another palette next month, since they both created their own palettes for the two previous months. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. They could make it a whole Zodiac collection, I guess, if they wanted to, but we'll just have to see. And for comparison, Melt's regular shadows usually come in this packaging. It's like magnetic little pans. They sell these individually. I have the Dark Matter stack, which comes with 4 shadows and then always the little mirror on top. I also have the Mean Streak stack, and then I have the Rust stack, which is 5 shades, and then the Baby Girl stack. And they do have a lot of really cool shades. They have a neon stack as well, which is really pretty. Using both the Gemini and the 27 palette, I feel like the quality is the same on both as well as the stacks. And Melt Cosmetics has made themselves known as a not very cheap brand, I would say, but they are very high quality, so I don't think you'd really be disappointed buying anything from them, honestly. I even have some of their lipsticks and liquid lipsticks that I really like a lot. But this palette, the 27 palette, retails for $58, the same as the Gemini palette did, and it comes with 10 shades each. And I mean, they're not cheap, but they are very high quality. I will put up a little price per gram up here, but they're definitely not cheap. So Melt Cosmetics is a cruelty-free brand and their shadows are vegan. So if that's important to you, then Melt Cosmetics got your back. And without further ado, let's get into the eyeshadow look. Okay, so first of all, here is the palette. Here it is in the unicarton. Here is the actual palette, 27. And the inside is beautiful. Got a nice mirror, and these colors are beautiful. So I got the Gemini palette. If you haven't seen my video on that, then I will link it. But this is the same size as the Gemini palette. Exact same size, same 10 shades. I really like the Gemini palette. Its colors are beautiful, first of all. I love green shadows. But this one is just so beautiful. It's definitely a more warm-toned, neutral palette. It's It's not like we don't already have one of those, but personally I got it because Melt shadows are just so great to me. They blend so nicely, they are super pigmented, and I just love their formula. They're not a cheap brand by any means, but I mean, I just love their formula, so had to get it. So I'm going to try to create a look with this. Let's swatch some shades first. So first of all, let's swatch the two shimmer shades. Go in with Crime Fighter and Vegas Past. I really like palettes that are more emphasized on matte shadows because I just love matte shadows more. Okay, so this is Crime Fighter and this is Vegas Past. Pretty. So there are those two shades. Okay, now let's swatch some of the matte shades. Let's go in with Moxie, One More Thing, Moonchild, and Naked Sleep. So first we have Moxie, then we have One More Thing, and then Moonchild. Ooh, see how pigmented that super dark shade is? Alright, and then there is Naked Sleep. So there are some of the mattes. I will include an insert of all of the shades, but I mean, Moonchild is the darkest shade in here, and it is not patchy at all. It is super pigmented. That is one swipe. Melt shadows are they're just some of the best.
Before we get into the rest of the video, I wanted to show you some dupes that I found for each of these shades. First, I found some dupes within the Jaclyn Hill palette by Morphe. 6 of the 10 shades I have found dupes for in this palette. First is Naked Sleep in the 27 palette. And the dupe for that is going to be the shade Roxanne in the Jaclyn Hill palette. Next is going to be the shade Downtown in the 27 palette. This is more of a transition shade, so it is more sheer. But the dupe for this shade is going to be MFEO in the Jaclyn Hill palette. Next, jumping down to the shade Moxie. This is like your warm terracotta red shade. The dupe for this is going to be the shade Hunts in the Jaclyn Hill palette. And Hunts is a little bit more cool toned and slightly darker, but they are very close. Now going down to the shade Thick in the 27 palette. This is the most pigmented shade in the palette, but is also very powdery. And the dupe shade for this is Buns in the Jaclyn Hill palette. Buns is slightly warmer and also slightly darker, but they are otherwise very close. Now onto the shade Vegas Pass. This is like your antique-y gold shade. I went through every single one of my palettes, and the closest I could find was the shade Queen in the Jaclyn Hill palette, and they are pretty much spot on, but the Jaclyn Hill palette is more pigmented on this shade. Lastly, we have the shade Moonchild, which is the darkest shade in the palette. This is like a cooler dark brown. And the dupe I found for this is the shade Mocha in the Jaclyn Hill palette. This shade is slightly warmer than Moonchild, but it is very close. And the other shade that is pretty close to it is the shade Chip. And this one has more of a purple undertone, but both of these shades mixed together would probably make the Moonchild shade perfectly. So here are all 6 dupes from the Jaclyn Hill palette. Now let's move on to the other shades. The next shade that we have a dupe for is the shade Nip Slip. And I found two dupes for this shade. One is the Lime Crime Venus XL in the shade Idolized. And this shade is just slightly warmer than Nip Slip, but they are otherwise very close. And then the other shade is in the Kylie Burgundy palette in the shade Penny, which is just slightly darker. Next is the shade Crime Fighter, which I found three dupes for. First is going to be the Anastasia Beverly Hills in the shade Henna, which is slightly more pink. And then in the Violet Voss Nicole Concilio palette, we have the shade Nicole, which is very close shade match. They are the same exact tone. And then also in the Morphe 3502 palette, the shade Zodiac, which is slightly more bronze. Now we have two dupes for the shade One More Thing, which is a nice taupey gray. One dupe for this is in the Urban Decay Gwen Stefani palette in the shade Harajuku. This shade is slightly more cool toned and also more gray. And the next dupe for this is in the Balm Appetit palette in the shade Raisin Bread. And this is just slightly more sheer and not as matte. And then the last shade that I have a dupe for is the shade Whiskey Neat, which looks like just a normal brown, but I actually had a very hard time finding a dupe for this shade in the exact same tone. But the closest one I could find is in the Morphe 3502 palette in the shade Stone. So that's all the dupes that I could find for you guys within my own collection. I hope this helps you decide whether you want this palette or not, or just helps you out if you can't afford it or don't want to buy it for any reason. And let's get into the eye look.
Okay, so I think I'm just going to try to create a look with this. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do yet, but these colors are definitely colors up my alley, so I'm sure it won't be hard. I'm just going to speed through this portion and I will point to the shades I'm using.
Oh, this you crazy mother.
I did get a little bit of fallout only from the darkest shade Moonchild, but I mean that brush is right off. And I usually do my eyes first anyway, so it's not a deal breaker for me at all. I did get a little bit of fallout with the Gemini palette too. So here is the full completed eye look, and I really like it. These shadows are so pigmented. You only have to dip once into these to get full pigment out, and they blend great. I mean, it didn't take me long to create this. They blended out really easily. I just love melt shadows, so I'm really glad that I got this palette. I feel like it's not as enticing as the Gemini palette just because the Gemini palette had a lot of really unique shades. I feel like this palette is definitely more of a warmer neutral palette, although there are a lot of cooler tone shades over here. So, I mean, warm and cool shadows, but it's definitely leaning on the more neutral. It's not like groundbreaking shades that we don't have already, so I would recommend you get this only if you are really wanting to try out Melt Cosmetics formula, or if you already have and you know you like it. I mean, you would not be disappointed in this palette, but it is a lot of money, so there's my 2 cents on it. I know I really like it. So I hope this video helped you on whether or not you wanted to pick up the 27 palette, and if you do, let me know, and I will see you in the next video.